Hello, beekeepers. This is Jake Beeman with Golden Fox Farms. I've got the hood up because it's a windy, cold, late February day, but it's a good day to do a task a lot of beekeepers avoid, and that is a hive necropsy. This is where we dig into a colony and find out why it died, and see if we have any disease issues we might have in the apiary, and if we can reuse this equipment. I've been asked to make a flow chart or a how-to on this for years. It is a difficult subject. This is built from years of digging through deadouts, mine own and my beekeeping neighbors. My experiences might be different than yours, but also what we have to do might be different than yours. In my state, if we have EFB, that's a reportable incident. If you're in another state like Indiana, not reportable. It's an optional thing for the states, unlike AFB. But anyway, let's focus on how to do a necropsy. I do have a flowchart published. There will be a link for you to get a copy of this handy dandy little thing that tells you how to do this in the comments below. Now, this is how the necropsy chart looks today. This is imperfect. It is a work in progress. There's actually two charts nested together on here. The teal on the bottom is something we do while we're already in the colony. The stuff that starts with the yellow question box, that's as we do the inspection of the dead colony. So we go sequentially from the left, but at the same time, we're keeping an eye out for scales and signs of AFB or EFB. This chart is imperfect. I think I said that once already. Case in point, tracheal mite does not make an appearance. Tracheal mite will kill colonies. They can express K-wing, they can have a withering population, but it's so exceedingly rare to encounter it in the States, at least up till this year, that I'm omitting it from this chart. Now, before we get into a necropsy, you want to do two things. One, you want to make sure they're actually dead. I checked this apiary on a warm 60-degree day. Everything was flying. I could pop lids and see what's going on. You don't want to assume a colony's dead until it's warm and dead, because a lot of these colonies at even 50 degrees, if you pop the lid, they'll look dead just because they're frozen in time until they can warm up. So always wait until you have above 55-degree temperatures to confirm deadouts. Now, I confirmed this on a warmer day. I'm coming back on a colder day to deal with it now because I can dig through this without having other stuff I need to do. The other aspect, after making sure it's warm and dead, is consider the history of the colony. You might recognize this one. This was the late season swarm catch. They moved into someone's hive bodies they had stored underneath their porch. They didn't want to be beekeepers anymore. I ended up taking them, and I kind of reset the colony. So they were a late comer to my yard. I have a lot of uninspectable comb in here, which some of y'all dig me on. In Kentucky, we can have uninspectable comb. We don't have a inspectable hive rule. And the other aspect, that swarm was in there for at least a month before I got it. When a swarm moves into a new colony space, they're at peak population, and they build pretty much all the comb they're going to build for the year in that first month. If they're a strong colony, they'll keep going. This one wasn't. And I didn't want to cut that comb out because I knew they wouldn't be able to rebuild afterwards. So I took a measured risk leaving them on their old comb. They're from an area I'm familiar with, the bees, and there's not disease issues over there in my apiaries in that area. So I'm pretty confident they weren't sick when they came in. So I felt good enough proceeding as was. Now that said, they are dead. So we can go through our flow chart and try to find out what killed this colony. I have a couple tools to facilitate that. One is the Mite Wash kit. You've seen me use this before. You can do mite washes on dead bees and get a mite count. and you can use that to determine if that was the cause or not. Of course, I have a Hive tool to actually dig around in this thing, and I have a piece of equipment I don't really mention, and that's this. This is a black light flashlight. It looks like a normal flashlight until I get it right in the lids. This is a 400 nanometer one. 360s are ideal, but 400s are cheaper. You can use these to do a certain test of the comb for certain disease. So let's go ahead and open up this hive, go through the flow chart, see what we think happened in here. Now, when you look at the flow chart, there's actually two different series of things to evaluate while we're in here. One is sequential. As you open up the hive, what do you see? The other is in every hive do this. The in every hive do this one is you're going to check the brood nest for AFB and EFB scales, and we'll explain that when we get to that. And that's just something you do with every deadout just because it's fast and those are significant diseases in our region. The other half of the flow chart starts with a basic question. How big is the dead colony? Small dead colonies are more common because that's what your mite kills do. That's what your queen failures do. And that's going to be 90% of the dead colonies in this region. If you have a large population at the deadout, it gets more complicated. It might be a viral condition like paralysis. It might be a fungal condition like Nosema or a Vairimorpha, as we call it today. So the first step for us in the flowing through chart, where we do it as we inspect, is to see the size of the dead cluster. Now I popped the lid on this one on that warm day to make sure they were dead. Again, check on a warm day before you assume they're gone. And I can tell you, I was pretty confident what killed them in about 5 seconds. And here's why. This is kind of the classic small dead cluster. When you see a cluster this size, one of a few things has happened. They either went into winter way too small, which is a possibility, or mites, because when they get sick with mites viruses, they fly out the door, so you have this small terminal population, or they had queen failure. There's one bee definitely checking me out right now. If they had queen failure, there's signs of that we can look for. Like queenless colonies will permit drones later in the year. They don't evict drones at any point. And I can tell you when I popped this yesterday, there were 2 or 3 drones right here on top. And I was like, oh, this might be a queen failure. Now, looking here today, I'm not so sure. That's the curse of coming back the next day to see what you have. Now, that said, looking at them more closely, there's a couple different signs. Let's bring the camera closer to spot the stuff. Enhance. Okay, here we are looking at this cluster. And a couple things are conspicuous to me. A couple of the bees are presenting K-wing, like she's got that forewing kicked out. That's K-wing. That is a viral condition. Usually when I see mortality with K-wing, it's a large colony. So that's conspicuous, but you want to see a lot of it. And a lot of times the dead bees will give you a false positive on it. Another thing I'm seeing, short abdomens. You see how short this one is? I hold her up to the camera as best I can. See how truncated she is? That short abdomen is a sign of deformed wing virus B, so that's suggesting this might be a mite kill. So with the flow chart, the first thing we do with a small cluster is we go, are there drones? And there is actually. Like this guy here. Notice he's a drone. And also notice how short he is. That is a drone that was likely reared in a worker cell. This is potentially a queen failure issue. We need to go a little deeper to find out. But the presence of drone in any amount really suggests they were queenless. I'm going to pull a couple frames out and try to work to where we can see what's going on in there. This was the box they built their own comb in, so they're going to be a little bit of a challenge to dig through. So this is that old bit of comb they just built on a top bar. So I'm just going to pluck that out and get a better visual on this cluster. And is that another drone? Yes, it is. We have a number of undersized drones in here. And if you have a number of undersized drones, that's going to be a queen failure because they don't kick drones out of hives experiencing queen failure. So at this juncture, it's queen failure or it's a mite kill. So it's the two things we can encounter when we have a small cluster. The way I can really be sure one way or the other is doing a mite wash on the dead bees, which is what we'll do next. Now, also a word of warning. I mentioned that those short abdomens can be a sign of deformed wing virus B. If you have a colony that's running out of foragers that has poor nutrition, you'll see the same thing. So it can be common in both of the major causes for a small mortal cluster, be it queen failure or mites. So it's not really indicative of anything. So let's do a mite wash on what we can, and that'll give us a pretty good indicator if this was just a queen failure or if it's something more so. They are a bunch of short bees in here. All right. Bring out your dead. It also kind of looks like they starved. I can tell you they didn't starve. These got robbed out after they died, which is a common situation. It's unfortunate how much comb I'm going to have to destroy. Oh, but they built this before I got the call on them, so there's nothing I could really do about that. It just kind of happens. Now, someone will notice, I'm sure, in the comments that there is a little mildew on these girls. That's normal. It's normal to see a little bit of mildew. They're dead. When you die, you start leaking. So that's not really indicating anything. There's more drones here, which is really kind of reinforcing my queen failure thoughts. Dead bees are very stagey. They stick to stuff. So we're almost at or at least a quarter cup in so far. You have more drones. More drones. Again, drones are a sign of queenlessness. You have a good time with the wax melter after this. Dead bees. Dead bees. More drones. More dead drones. One of the signs I had trouble in this colony last year, and I didn't act on it just because when I found it, they didn't take their winter feed very well. And when you have that, quite often that means you have a problem in there. The problem is it's a little late in the year to use that to fix it. Usually the tail has been told. All right, I'm going to call that a half cup. So let's go ahead and give them a wash, and that'll tell us if we had a mite condition in there. While there's bee legs and everything else in there, there's no mites. This was a queen failure. And part of the reason why it was a queen failure, I had a hive I couldn't inspect. So as long as bees are coming and going, I could put a mite treatment on here or whatever, but they really went unwatched and no queen. Your population gets small or you start to have a bunch of drones and your worker population dwindles, and then the hive collapses in that small cluster. So that's why that's on that small cluster side of the flow chart. So the other aspect, the looking for scales. These scales we described, they kind of look like a snake scale at the bottom of the cell. And the way to look for those is to get some brood comb, convenient handful of brood comb coming up, and have the sun over your shoulder and look in the bottom of these cells. Now what I am seeing, so you can have to play with this camera, see if you all can see it too. There's a couple pockets of pollen that look kind of slimy. That's not abnormal at deadout. You're looking to see if there's any melted brood in there, and I'm just not seeing any signs of it. If we encountered some, we'd want to see if it fell out or if it was stuck. If it's stuck, AFB. If it falls out, it's EFB. And the reality is, if you smack it hard enough, the EFB will come out, the EFB scales. And of course, we can take our ultraviolet light, pop it in the bottom of those cells, and see if we get anything that fluoresces green. If we find scales that fluoresce green, this would be a positive for AFB, which thankfully is not the case here. Now here we are on the other end of my apiary, and this one's also a deadout. Now what's conspicuous to me, this was also a late season swarm on natural comb I couldn't inspect. So there's a theme this year. Also notice there's a feeder on top. If there's a feeder on top of an 8 or 10 frame in my yard in the spring, that means they were slow to take it. If they're slow to take feed, that often means there's something gone wrong below. It was not a good time of year for me to figure out or fix it, so I did my sign of the cross and let them run with it. So let's pop the lid and see if we can spot what happened in this one. Oh, I just got bumped in the head. The hives around this are warm enough to be flying, and one just bounced off my head. So I'm going to come over here. All right. And this one, the top box was standard equipment. So I put a box of drawn comb on top of these girls. And there's very few bees, but goodness gracious, look at that. Drones. Drones in a dead winter colony are a queen failure. So we probably have a queen failure in this one. Short drones, no less, which implies laying workers or a blank shooting queen. Half the bees on this are drone. Let's go to the lower box, see if we can get a more conclusive answer. And really, I'm seeing so much drone, I'm not even really worried about it. Trying to figure out what it is otherwise. Most of the dead in this hive appear to fall into the bottom. There's the freestyle comb they built. These girls moved into some abandoned equipment. Now again, their abdomens are truncated. That's a sign of deformed wing virus. It's also a sign of malnutrition. So don't use it as a definite answer. Most of the dead are on the bottom. So let's pop down there and see what we can make sense of. Oh, now scarred on the front. Alright. So I'm going to take off this bottom pair of boxes. Oh, now they're way too small. So again, it's going to be on that Varroa deadout or queen failure side of the chart. And just from the drones I saw topside, I'm inclined to say it's drones. There's drones down here too. So I'm going, yeah, there's a bunch of little drones. So drone. This is a queen failure. I'm not even going to bother doing a wash. Interesting theme. Now, we've used our handy dandy necropsy flow chart to identify the cause of death of 2 colonies here. We checked them for EFB and AFB while we were in them. When we opened them up, both had small clusters with drones present, and Mite Wash confirmed it was not a mite issue, so we can fall back on that being a queen failure. And I feel confident about that because you don't have drones in winter colonies unless there's a queen problem. They've known that since the 1700s. It's actually one of the ways they evaluated which skeps to keep and which ones to destroy before we had inspectable hives. Now, if you find a large cluster, it is a more complicated set of analysis. The first question is, do the bees have K-wing or an oily appearance? We looked at some K-wing in that prior small colony. K-wing can be a false flag. If they're oily, that's not a false flag. That's paralysis. So if you have a large dead population that doesn't appear to be starvation and they've got K-wing or oily appearances, it's most likely a paralysis virus. If they're at the top of the box or if they're around the brood cluster and there isn't food next to them, it's most likely a starvation. If that's not the case, if you got a lot of dead in there, it might be Nosema, and you're going to have to send samples to confirm that one way or the other. Now, let's say a Nosema test is indicated. You need to send a sample out for Nosema. What you do is you put the same number of bees you'd have for a Mite Wash into alcohol. And it needs to be the high proof stuff, 70 to 90% stuff. Isopropanol, I should say. And then you drain them. Once these bees are drained, this is considered a dry good, and you can ship it common carrier, UPS, USPS, whatever. Put these in a Ziploc bag, put the bag in a box, send it to Beltsville or whatever testing facility you're going to use. Do include a letter that says why you're sending them and who to contact for with that. Today, that is a free service that U.S. citizens can use for their bees at any time. We are seeing a big shakeup at the federal level. That might not be the case long term, but you can actually do Nosema analysis with a microscope and a few tools. That'll be a different video for a different day. If it's Nosema, you got to disinfect the hive. If it's not Nosema, there's a few more questions to ask yourself. Like, does the colony have a lot of feces in it? They could have dysentery from something other than Nosema, or they could have been trapped inside by a blocked entrance. In both cases, you're going to disinfect that colony because that feces is a bugbear for disease in there. If that's not the case, second, that's the last question. Are the bees damp? Was the hive properly set up for ventilation and insulation for whichever style of wintering you're doing? If the top of the box is cold, that can cause condensation to come down on top of the bees' heads. So you can, very rarely, encounter a moisture-killed hive in my region. But that's why that's towards the very back end of this thing. I've only seen one moisture-killed hive in 10 years. I've seen 3 Nosema hives in 10 years. 95% of the deadouts out there are going to be small clusters, and most of those are going to be varroa kills. Now, I say 95% of deadouts are going to be these small clusters. Most of those are mite kills. Some of those are queenless conditions. Now, there's one that I don't see in my apiaries very often, but it is common among beginners and people learning beekeeping, and that is the small colony that doesn't have mite problems or drones or signs of a queen problem. These are colonies that generally entered winter too weak. If you have that colony you didn't feed, like a package that's not growing, and you have a dearth, and they didn't repopulate before winter, they just go into winter too weak, and they just kind of fade out. You're not going to really see positive signs of what did that, but you can predict which ones it's going to happen to. And again, this is something I see most frequently with beginners, with packages, with weak colonies in the fall. Now, in most cases, you're going to find you can reuse the equipment. There's a few exceptions. AFB, you're going to have to burn this stuff. There's not a workaround. You need to contact your apiarist and destroy it. If it's EFB, proceed with caution. My protocol is to leave the equipment fallow for a year. and put it back into service afterwards. That gives time for the bacteria to discharge and die off without its host. In Britain, they burn those colonies, so just be aware. You might have a recurring issue with that one. And the other case you need to disinfect the hive would be Nosema or dysentery events. Beyond that, and mind you, this represents like 98% of deadouts. You can reuse the equipment. So take your time, go through the flow chart, see what killed that colony, adjust your own practices for next year. Because if you've got a bunch of Varroa deaths, well, I guess I know what you need to improve on. And use that to come into the new season and exit the new season more successfully. Once again, this is available on the link in the comments. And I'll say good luck and happy beaking. But it's a good day to do a task a lot of beekeepers avoid. Oh, losing my camera. Oh, this is just a challenging day.